Hey everybody, welcome to the Lionheart Institute podcast. We are here with Thomas Table Talks. This week's topic is going to be a good one. I'm Richard Thomas.
And I'm Tiffany Thomas.
And we are going to be diving into this thing called the 2020 election for President of the United States. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is an exciting time. There's a lot of craziness going on in the world today. There's a lot of protests. There's a lot of counter-protests. There's a lot of people burning flags. Don't do that. There's a lot of insanity going on in the streets. People carrying guns and rifles and pistols and talking about a civil war. Oh me, oh my. I mean, there is insanity going on in the world today. And we live in the midst of people really trying to steal an election.
Right.
And the interesting thing about the stealing the election thing is that you've got people on both sides screaming they're trying to steal the election. Yep. So as we dive into this, let's get into the meat and bones, really the guts of the thing we call the electoral process here in the United States of America. If you haven't subscribed yet, we want to encourage you to take a moment to do so. Smash that subscription button, the bell icon, and then like and comment. Now, our last video, we got a ton of comments.
We did.
Some of them I absolutely couldn't understand whatsoever.
Yeah, that's true.
They came from a group of people, I think, that come from this world of Q.
The QAnons.
The QAnons. And it's wildly interesting to hear their perspective, their insights. And then if you go to my Facebook page, it's absolutely alive with $1,000 bets and $500 bets. And I'm sure that they would bet the family farm on who's going to be president.
It's very clear that even though Joe Biden has been declared the winner of the election, Trump supporters, which as we know by the election is some 70 million people, still believe he has won this election. And that at the end of all this, the truth will be revealed and he will still be declared the President of the United States.
And I certainly don't mean to make fun of it because there is some real constitutional precedents.
True.
There's some real constitutional avenues that could become a reality. So stay tuned in this process so that you can kind of hear a little bit of how that would work and how it would shape out. And we've addressed it a little bit in our previous videos, but it's absolutely the craziest attack against the concept of democracy that we've ever heard of in our lifetime, at least, to where you literally have a person who, by popular vote, is lost. By electoral vote has lost, and just simply says, I refuse to concede. Yeah. And whether you're for it or against it at this point in the video, obviously, it's a wild attack against the concept that we have always considered democracy. Right?
Yeah, what Trump is doing right now is totally anti-democratic. I mean, everything that our foundation of this country was built on, our democracy, he is literally destroying at the moment. He's not only continuing to divide this country by giving 70 million people hope to believe that he is still the rightful president, that at the end of all this, he will still be in office for 4 more years. So now we have 70 million people who still have hope, who are now going out writing.
I wouldn't say quite 70 million people. Well, of many of the Republicans in the party have already given hope up.
The Republican Party is becoming greatly divided at this point. There are many senators and governors, Republican, that are saying, hey, it's time to just say we lost, and move forward, because what Trump is doing is not good for this country at all.
And you see it in the result of what they call the Million Maga March, right? Or the Million Maga March, right? Which statistics indicate is 10K. Right, 10,000 people showed up.
Right,
Washington,
definitely
D.C.
not a million people.
Don't have your feelings hurt. They did the same thing to black people back at the Million Man March, which is interesting that you would take that concept, rewind history, study your stuff, and you'll find out you always taking our shit, man. But anyway, let's get back on rhythm. These cats show up in D.C. fully gauged out. I mean, they've got their Trump signs, they've got weapons, they've got American flags with Trump on them, painted on them. They got American flags and garments, which, by the way, is far more disrespectful to the flag than Kaepernick ever taking a knee.
100%.
Ooh, we're making friends right now, aren't we?
100%.
If you haven't tuned out, you're going to find out a little bit more like that.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because no cops showed up at this march.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Protest by Trumpsters.
Right.
And not until counter-protesters showed up was there really a police presence on guard. Apparently nobody seemed to be concerned about thousands of people walking around with weapons protesting that Trump is the rightful president.
Right. There's a mindset that that's okay.
Apparently that was acceptable.
That these are law-abiding citizens who understand how to use their weapons.
Right.
And only if necessary.
Yeah, they're not going to create violence, of course, despite that police reports would say otherwise.
Right. So absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's of the 7% of Black Lives Matter protests that violence did occur, a high percentage of that, according to the FBI and Homeland Security, was created by the far right extremists that came to promote hate, promote violence, division.
Which, of course, all those groups showed up for the march, the Mega March.
Isn't that interesting?
Proud Boys, KKK, white nationalists, they all showed up in force.
Were they doing this? Singing?
I don't know. They were doing a lot of singing, that's for sure.
And I say this lightly, just to poke fun. Okay, we know that there are certainly some good Republicans, and there's some good Trump supporters. I'm finding out more and more just by dialogue that not everybody that is a racist that supports Trump is necessarily racist. But it's interesting that all racists support Trump supporters. Right.
They certainly are.
It's become a famous saying in the world that we live in today, right? So give us a little bit about the process of where we're at right now.
Right.
All of a sudden in America, we have a president who has served his time, served his nation. Whether you think he's done the best job as he's proclaimed, or maybe the second to best job since Lincoln, or whether you think he's done the worst job of all. That time, according to the popular vote, has come to an end.
Yes.
That time, according to the Electoral College, has come to an end.
Yes.
However, there is a great debate over whether or not the election is fair and just, or we're stealing the vote, that Biden and Harris are stealing the vote.
Yeah.
Not that they personally are doing it, but the Democratic Party, because of fraud, right? And so we have to begin to look at the process of how we got here.
Right. So it's interesting because in this place where we are right now in the election, okay, I would like to just clarify that in 2016, we are sitting pretty much almost identical numbers to when Trump declared victory over Clinton.
So very good observation.
Clinton had, I think, 220 something electoral votes, and Trump had 306. Really within a 10-point difference right now. Biden now has 306 and Trump has 332. So at this point, Trump had already declared himself the president-elect in a landslide victory, as he stated.
Right.
And they're exactly almost identical numbers to where Biden is right now.
And where we stand today, obviously, record number of turnout.
Right.
One of the reasons that we have that record number of turnout was the Black, Hispanic, Native American vote, right? I mean, absolutely phenomenal amount of some tribes, for instance, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. Some tribes had 96% turnout. 90, as high as 97, 98% towards Biden. And those results are absolutely phenomenal. The support of 45% of white women, 96%, 93%, I believe, of African American women. Right. A huge turnout of African American men. Right. There are some reports that say that numbers have increased in African American community in the Trump camp. Right, that those numbers enlarged. However, it's been a record number setting election. So it's not so much that the number has enlarged as it is all the numbers have enlarged. Right. And so he's not really stolen percentages of voters. He's just gotten more than
there's just more voters.
In percentages, right. And one of the things that people need to be cognitive of, and I know that there's a bunch of dates that are going to follow, and I'd love for you to review those. But one of the reasons we have such a massive turnout is because of COVID. Right?
Yes.
People have been dissatisfied with how the country's been run. I'll say it from the perspective of run.
Right.
However, their discontent, as much as how it's been run, with the state of the world that we live in.
Right.
So obviously, Trump did not create racism.
No.
Trump did not create hate.
No.
Trump did not create this division that we're feeling. From what we know, he didn't create COVID, right? However, there's this huge dissatisfaction in the world that we live in. Approval rates that have dropped tremendously as a result of it. So many people were driven to the polls to vote, to change, to see something different in the world that we live in. Many of those, because of social distancing, chose to do so at the instruction of the Democratic Party, of the leadership of the Democratic Party from home, which led to mail-in ballots, where in the Republican Party, there was a voice, stay away from mail-in ballots, and I can't wait for you to get into that and unfold that a little bit, how that backfired a little bit, right? But can you give us a little bit about the dates and how important this time is right now for our audience to really pay attention to?
Yeah, so there are some really important dates. I know there's a lot of confusion right now and chaos with everything going on with Trump, all his accusations and lies about the election. And so people are kind of confused as what the process, where we go from here. Because historically speaking, and I know a lot of Trump supporters and Trump himself has said this along with his children, that, you know, the news doesn't call the winner, right? We hear that constantly from Trump supporters.
Sure, which is true.
Right. But here's the thing. If you look at historically, all presidential elects were pretty much announced by media.
Sure.
Like they are based on each state that potentially calls who they predict to be the winner. And that's usually how they tally it. Look, the truth is most times the president-elect is always called before all the votes have been counted. And that is because based on the amount of votes, each state can determine essentially who the winner is going to be.
But
right?
there's not going to be a flip in this.
There's not going to be, based on a number of votes, they can say, hey, we don't have enough votes to turn this election, so we're going to say this is the winner for this state.
And we're not talking about the chances of a Hail Mary in the fourth quarter. We're not talking about a 20 points in 5 minutes of a basketball game, right? We're talking statistically.
Yeah, because
the number of votes collected
yes.
can't match the number of votes that could still be collected.
Right. They know for every single county how many registered voters there are, so how many ballots potentially there should be. And that's why they can tend to call these elections before essentially every vote is counted.
And that's led to great frustration in the past, right?
Sure.
People, Clinton herself, not President Clinton, but Clinton, who ran Hillary Clinton, she didn't concede the same night of the election because she doubted some of the numbers herself, right? The same way that Trump won the election. It's kind of interesting, right? However, she didn't concede, but she knew what was good for democracy. She knew what was good for our republic. She knew, based on the numbers that were presented, if everything was just and fair and there was not massive, widespread corruption, that the election had been won.
Right. And then the following day she conceded.
Yeah.
And so just to clarify, everything that has gone on in 2020 with the proclamation that Biden and Harris won the election and that he's the president-elect is the exact same process that happened in 2016 when Trump was announced as the president-elect. So there's been no difference as far as the reporting, the announcing, and Trump was happily ready to accept that he won the election in 2016.
Right.
So he didn't care who announced it. He'd won. That was all he cared about. So I just want to...
Very similar to what he declared this time.
Yes, halfway through the election.
Right.
So I really just want to clarify that what is going on with Biden is no different than what has gone on with previous presidential elects. Okay.
Unless you rewind time to so far back that it's very difficult to
Right. But I mean, in the last several decades, this is the way it's been done.
Sure.
It's all formalities until the official numbers come in, but we've never had a president not accept the initial election process.
Feels a little bit like a child at the basketball court who brought his basketball to the court and decides, I'm leaving and I'm taking my ball with me, right?
Right.
But he won't leave. He's asking you to leave the court.
Yeah. He's like, no, it's my court.
Right.
So some of the information I want to give you isn't something most people know because it's not something that's really ever affected us. However, this election, given the fact that we have a president who will not concede, these are important dates because once we get through these dates, it will inevitably lead us to Inauguration Day where Biden becomes the official president.
Or at least hasn't conceded yet. Right. There is a lot of discussion in the camp he's mentioned to several people. I read an article just the other day that he mentioned, well, listen, if it doesn't work out this time, there's always 2024. Right?
Yeah, he kind of goes back and forth, and so do people in the Trump campaign. You have some that have already said that he's lost, and others that says he'll be back in 2024.
Sure.
So there's definitely...
And some that say he'll be the president as of January.
Right. So it's all over the board. So here's some numbers, some dates, I should say, to help you understand. So every state has to certify, every county within every state has to certify, and every state officially has to certify the votes, which is then the official vote towards a specific candidate. Most states have until November 20th to be able to certify, so that way they're done and they can continue on to the next process. However, they have been given until the beginning of December to certify, to allow for recounts. There are a few states right now, Georgia being one of them, that is in the process of doing a recount. I believe, I know they're trying to get Pennsylvania, but Biden won with a high enough percentage in Pennsylvania. I don't believe they can actually call for a recount, so we'll see how that goes. So states have to allow for recounts. However, there is something that we call a safe harbor deadline, and that is when no matter what has happened with the recounts, that it has to be done. The state has to certify, and it's done. This actually happened in the 2000 election. Florida was recounting. However, they did not get all their votes recounted in time. And so because of that, the Supreme Court ruled that it no longer mattered. They had to certify based on who they initially felt won the election for that year. So they have until December 8th to get the recounts done and the certifications done. Now, once that happens, then the electors come together and then they cast their votes for the winner. Then they send that to Congress. Now, Congress has until the middle of December to say, okay, we are going to certify these votes and officially say this is going to be our president.
Right.
Okay? So by the end of December, Congress will have officially said this is our president. And then, of course, January 20th, happy celebration day, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be our president and vice president.
Now, what happens in the process of all of this with litigations galore?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. They're coming from every direction.
Right.
However, many of them have already been thrown out of court.
Yeah.
Right? Many states have already begun to certify the process. Despite allegations and frustration.
Right.
The FBI has already declared that there was no fraud.
Yep.
Homeland Security, which is part of his cabinet, right, has already said that it's the fairest election that they've ever overseen, right, that's ever happened in America, right? So with that process, there's still some steps and things he can do to try to challenge it as well. Right. And so we need to stay vigilant. We need to stay aware of those things, right?
Right. The numbers that I went over are the deadlines, the official deadlines for things to happen. However, Trump can put a kink in some of these things along the way and cause problems.
Now, many people would say that knowing this, right, that there's been kind of a setup, right? That he has been not strategic in just running a campaign to be reelected, but that he's run a campaign to set up allegations that could try to put him in the White House through the back door. Right,
through the House.
Through the House. And while unfortunately this is constitutional, it certainly is attack against our republic. It's attack against democracy. It's really spitting in the eye of everything that America would stand for: being just, being fair, taking a loss like a man or a woman should, and really, or a person should is a better word to use there, and really saying, hey, we gave it a best shot. We did everything that we could. Our best wasn't good enough. I like that, right? And now it's time to move forward, right? There is a point where every soldier needs to understand the war is over.
Yeah.
You can't be the Japanese internment camp. You can't be the Japanese soldier who buries themselves in the mountains for 20 years, right? And thinking that we're still at war. And I just use that because it's an illustration. Many people do it out of every culture, out of every nationality, of every race and religion, where they just go to a place where there's been a movement, and instead of moving with the time, they set up a monument and they bury themselves in that monument. Now, whatever you think of Trump, whether you think he was the most phenomenal president of all time, right, whether you think he's the greatest president of our era, he is now becoming a monument, right? Yeah. What Americans need to do is to keep the movement towards justice, right, towards democracy, towards truth, towards historical integrity, right, towards growing as a nation. Yeah. There are many things that I believe, and once upon a time was even a huge Trump supporter in the sense, okay, I thought a new voice, a new vision, someone that's not a politician, someone that's going to drain the swamp. Well, he's not drained the swamp. He's just turned the alligators against each other. Yeah. And he's been a voice to kind of direct the alligators against the people. And I say that not just tongue in cheek. I truly believe that he has tried to create division. Oh, 100%. Sow division to try to create a moment such as this that began 9 months ago, to where he could illegitimately begin to pursue avenues to take the election, and kind of talk about that for a minute. What I mean by illegitimate, and not illegitimate unconstitutionally, but illegitimately morally.
You know, what's really tough right now is Trump has an opportunity to begin to unite this nation and prepare it for the transition of Biden and Harris administration. And it's so heartbreaking to see that instead he chooses to continue to create even bigger divisions, right, and to cause, as people are talking about, possibly another civil war, because he's given these supporters hope and belief that he is the rightful president.
You keep using the word hope. I don't think it's hope. I think it's rage.
I say hope because that's tends to be what inspires people to continue to fight for something, right? It is their hope that Trump will remain their president. And, but I don't know if that's the right word.
When I look at people like Trump, when I look at, and I say Trump, maybe those that follow him, I look at a person that's been bullied. Right. I look at a person that doesn't have hope that the bullies will stop beating them up. Yeah. I look at a person that's full of rage and has tried to plot and tried to scheme and tried to figure out a way that they could get even, right? And so when I hear all these conspiracies and I see men walking around with guns and I see women walking around with guns, I see the hate that comes from their mouths, I see the blind rage, I see the blind devotion without you put in front of them stats and they say those stats don't matter. Right. You put in front of them truth. You say those truths don't matter. It's fake news, a term that was created by Trump as propaganda so that he could stir the waters of the swamp. Right. Right. When I look at that, I don't see people that have hope. I see people that are full of rage and anger and want to take that out on the other. They want to take that out against people that are different than them. And we'll look up the term. I'll put it in the area down below, but there's a whole study of people that hate the other just because they're a good target, right? True. Because it takes away personal responsibility for their own failures, right? America is where America is because of racism. Right. America is where it is because of prejudice, because of hate, because of classism, because it's looked down on people that are not at the top of the mountain, who haven't arrived there or who have been held back and been victimized. Now, I use the word victimized not because they're victims, but because they have been oppressed for the purpose of those who are in power. And those people that were once bullied are now trying to bully their way to the top.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a very fair analogy on that. I think if you look back, since probably even as early as February, March, Trump has started to lay the foundation for the 2020 election. Right. And it's surprising to me that his supporters don't see this. Yeah. So the reality is, who starts to lay a foundation and make claims on something that hasn't even happened yet?
Sure. Without the effort to rectify it. Right. See, now, he's the most powerful person in the world. Right. Most powerful political voice in our nation. Right. Crying about a wolf in the woods, but he doesn't gather an assembly to go out into the woods and check for the wolf, right? He's just crying wolf at this point, right?
Yeah.
And the problem with the person that cries wolf, we all know the story, right? Is eventually the wolf shows up. And the scary thing is that the wolf can show up in the form of foreign governments.
Yeah.
The wolf will show up in the form of corruption. The wolf will show up in the form of what is worse for this nation ever, in the sense of, you think that Democrats are moving us towards socialism or communism.
Yeah.
But the wolf is truly looking to divide, because the greatest thing of all that you can understand is that a ship never sinks because of the water on the outside. The ship sinks because of the water that comes on the inside.
Yeah.
In other words, we don't lose because of the fractures from without, but from the fractures from within. And so America, we've always had issues, right? We've had divisions and separations, but we've never really truly had a person at this level of power, this level of authority, this level that we should be able to trust and say they have the best interest of America at heart.
Right.
Really taking a splitting wedge and driving a maul into it with the force and the anger of really being a pouty little, I'll stop at that.
Well, the reality is that this playing field that he laid, he didn't essentially try to fix anything. As you had said, if somebody sees some issues, right, with something, you're going to want to fix those issues. If there's concern that something may not run correctly, you're going to want to fix it before it's time.
Ample time,
for them.
Right? 9 months out, you have ample time to address issues.
Absolutely. And I mean, the truth of the matter is, if you go back to like 4 years worth of Trump's speeches, you will find him throwing this stuff out actually for years.
Right.
He just made a very strong effort the last 9 months to make sure he pounded these doubts and these concerns and fears into the American people. The reality is, he could have had a chance to fix some of these, but instead he actually did the opposite. And he went more the direction of trying to suppress votes.
Right.
And instead of, quote unquote, attacking head on the potential voter fraud that he was concerned about.
Right.
So he really actually...
Which there is no indication of voter fraud.
None.
Right.
So he said in April of 2020, he was quoted as saying, he actually tweeted this, okay? And he made the statement that absentee ballots are a great way to vote for the many senior citizens, military, others who cannot get to the polls on election day. These ballots are very different from 100% mail-in voting, which is ripe for fraud and shouldn't be allowed. So this is where he started the lie that mail-in ballots would be fraudulent. So this is something he continued to reinforce time and time again, that one, absentee ballots were great.
Awesome.
They were true. The process for how they were sent out and counted was trustworthy. So absentee ballots were okay. We like those. But mail-in ballots are all going to be fraudulent. That this is going to be the most fraudulent election in our history because of mail-in ballots. Now, to be fair, we are in a pandemic. Okay?
Yeah.
So the truth is, states wanted to protect their citizens and not send them to unnecessary risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? So the election committee knew without a doubt that probably somewhere along the lines of 50% of voters were going to mail their ballots. Okay, so that was like the essential estimate. They knew that was going to be the case, which of course is going to be a significant difference from previous ones. So with the pandemic, all states were doing mail-in ballots.
Right.
Okay. Now that's something that's been allowed to happen for a while.
Okay.
34 states had allowed for no excuse ballots. Now, the difference is some states will allow ballots through mail, but there's restrictions. So, for example, you have to be disabled, or you have to have a medical reason you can't get to a poll booth. A military, of course, is one. But there are very specific limitations and restrictions that allow you to mail your ballot. If you don't meet those, then you have to go to the polls.
Now, do those tend to be what would be called red states and blue states separated, or just a kind of a mix?
So interesting enough, among the 34 states that removed, and some of these states did remove the restrictions specifically because of the coronavirus. Okay. So there were more states with restrictions, but 34 states had no restrictions during this election because of the pandemic.
Gotcha.
Okay. So 12 of these states were Republican. 12 of the other states were Democratic. And the other 10 had a split partisan control. So there is actually no evidence to support the claim that mail-in ballots are very specific to one party.
Gotcha.
Okay? Now, 11 of the 16 states that had restrictions chose to waive the limitations that Trump tried to implement in the mail-in ballots. They said, no, we don't agree with those. We're not going to use them. So 5 states chose to follow Trump's limitations on who was allowed to mail in ballots. So ultimately, at the end of the day, 45 states had no restrictions for mail-in ballots, and only 5 did.
Now let's take a second and address this question. The president, which is over the entire nation, right? Does he have the authority to tell a state how to run their election?
He does not.
Okay.
So elections are all done by state legislation. The government does not have control over states. That is something that's been in place for a really long time, and they are all governed by state legislation.
So the state sets up how the election will occur, what the mandates are, what the regulations are, when the votes will be collected, when the deadline is.
Yes.
And how the count process will happen.
Yeah, so every state can have different rules.
Okay.
So this is one of the things that's actually really important about our democracy, is there is no specific across the board way that every state is required to do this. It is left individually to each state to define how they process their ballots, how they count them, how they do the votes.
Sure.
And all states can be different in how they do this.
And that has a lot to do with the fact that we are a republic.
Yes.
Right? And so that's something potentially, if you have questions about that we could do a future video on, as far as what a republic is. But it's important to understand that each state somewhat governs themselves, although we're in a big picture in the union together, right? That we are one nation under God, indivisible, right?
Right.
And so forth, as far as our Pledge of Allegiance and so forth. However, each state has the right to run the election as they see fit.
Correct.
As long as they come to the place where they declare electorally the winner.
Right, and they can show a process that says this is how we do it, this is how we ensure security, this is how we ensure that there's no fraud.
That is just and fair.
Right, 100%.
Sure.
They have to have a process in place because they have observers from the Democrat Party, Republican, and a third non-biased party. So they have to be able to show this to support their claims. But yes, every state is allowed to do this.
Okay.
So I do want to make it clear that red states still all voted by mail in this election.
They had that option.
They had that option, and actually quite a few of them did. Ohio, which went to Donald Trump, voted considerably high percentage by mail.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify that, because Trump has made the allegations that all the mail-in ballots pretty much are Democratic, they were all for Biden, and they were all fraudulent.
Right.
But that is actually untrue, because a lot of red states voted by mail.
Sure. But specifically, though, however, Donald Trump told them, his party, not to vote by mail.
Yes, he did.
So saying that a lot of their game is going to come by that, right?
Yep.
A lot of their votes are going to come by that is illogical. It's kind of like a head football coach saying, hey, we're a running football team.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you expect that team to come out and throw the ball 50 times,
Right.
right? That's not the way they're going to win their game, right? They're going to win it the way that the coach wanted them to win it. Well, the Democrats decided that they were going to go by air, that they were going to throw the ball 50 times a game.
Right.
And that was just their offensive approach and strategy to the election. That's just the strategy that the party used, right? They used it for a lot of different reasons, voter suppression being one of them, really COVID being another. They wanted to make sure that the nation stayed safe. There's social distancing going on. Well, there's no better way to social distance than via mail. Right. And so they wanted to protect the party. They wanted to protect the citizens of the country. Right. And there's no indication.
Right.
There's actually evidence in the opposite direction that there is any mail fraud whatsoever of any significant value that would change the direction of the election.
You know, the truth is that, Trump spent a lot of time talking over and over and over again that mail-in ballots were all fraudulent, right? And that this was going to be a rigged election. So this is something that he'd been saying for months. So the Democrats basically said to the American people, vote early.
Right.
Okay, and they didn't just tell everybody to go out and use mail-in ballots, which of course they recommended because we are in a pandemic, right? So, but they said vote early.
Yeah.
Because the sooner we can get votes in, the less likely that Donald Trump would have any substantial evidence to be able to support his constant discussion that it's going to be a fraudulent election.
Now, the funny thing in that is many people did vote early. We got our vote in as early as we could.
Yes, we did.
Right? I mean, we stood at the ballot box. We were trying to get our vote in, right? The interesting thing is, however, they didn't count those ballots until after they collected at-site balloting. So, while many of those ballots were already set aside, they were ready to go, right? The election kind of spiked in the direction that everyone said that it would trend,
right?
Which is the votes began to explode for Trump because that's the order that they counted it in, right? If you're going to count first grade votes first, second grade votes second, third grade votes third, right? And so forth through a class election at school, right? You're not going to get the fifth and sixth graders until the end of the process, until the very last votes. And if you have a larger fifth and sixth grade class than you do first, second, and third, you win that election.
Well, voter analysis, election analysis, they had been predicting the way this direction was go. All of them, so multiple analysis were done on the direction is. So it was no surprise to anybody that it was going to go red early on, and then it was going to go blue. And it was because of the fact of the way Trump pushed for poll ballots, Democrats pushed for vote-in ballots. So,
and if you're surprised, Lionheart Institute audience, then you need to go back and to consider how the thing was presented and why the votes were tallied as they were. Don't just hear a guy shouting from the rooftop, "Don't steal the vote" and don't rig the election. Consider the truth, as we'll consider any comment that's placed in the below us, and really wrestle with the truth of the matter, common sense wise, statistics wise. Observations of professionals that you should be able to trust, and make your decisions based on that, not based on just the raw emotion of a guy saying, "I won the election."
Right. So actually, one comment that we got from a Trump supporter from our last video, and she was going on about that Trump won this election fair and square. The Democrats stole it from him. Her example was the fact, we'll use Pennsylvania for an example. How Trump was way up by 700,000 votes. He actually declared himself the winner of Pennsylvania when they were halfway done counting the votes, saying he was already up by 700,000, so he won Pennsylvania by a landslide.
Sure.
Which they had expected it to go that way. So this lady was talking about how, they stopped counting all of a sudden in the middle of the night, then all of a sudden Biden's numbers started skyrocketing in the middle of the night, so how can you say that's not fraudulent?
Right.
But think about it, people. Think about how the process works. Many states stopped counting during the night because this is going to be a long process. They knew this. 60 million votes they had to count by mail.
It's amazing.
Right. They had to open all these ballots, hand count them all. It was a lot. And, while some states did run night shifts, other states did not.
Sure.
So they took breaks. So what happened was they would count these votes all the way up until it was time to close down for the night. And then they would post what they had counted so far. So it appeared that to Trump supporters that all of a sudden they were closed, and then all these votes randomly appeared in the middle of the night for Biden. But that's not how the process went. These were counted votes prior to them closing down for the night.
The other interesting thing about it too is I didn't see. Now maybe it was projected this way, but I don't think it'd be even feasible. I didn't see a rolling number of votes. I saw data at points where numbers would jump. Right. It'd be like a reset button, and there'd be an update. Well, if you go away on break, right, you grab your sandwich for halftime, and there's a touchdown, and you follow up, and you get a fumble, and you score right away. You can come back very quickly to a very different score.
Yeah.
And I'm just using football as an analogy. but you have to watch the process of it happen. And so in this case, right, they had momentum going into halftime. Mm-hmm. They got the ball on the kickoff from halftime, and they took the opening kickoff all the way back in halftime. Right. And you started to begin to see where Trump game plan was beginning to falter, mm-hmm. right? You saw where he was having turnovers, and I'm just using football analogies here, right? Where he had a fumble, where he had a bad passing play. And now all of a sudden you begin to see how the hate, the determination of the people, the will of the people began to catch up mm-hmm. with people that were just Trump supporters, Republicans, or just blind to what they believed was the right person for the job, and they were wrong. Right? I mean, well, I can't say you were wrong. However, I can say that the people spoke.
They did.
They wanted a new president.
I mean, look, the reality is, and of course, I use Pennsylvania because that's one of the hot states right now. But the reality is, when Trump declared himself the winner in Pennsylvania, they essentially were up 700,000 votes, but they knew there was still over 2 million mail-in ballots that had yet to be counted. And both the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign knew most of those ballots were going to be Democratic votes.
Right.
They already knew that. So Trump knew when he announced himself the winner, he was talking about being up more than 700,000 votes. He knew there was still over 2 million votes that hadn't yet been counted.
With a high percentage of which were most likely from Biden counties.
Right.
From areas in which
is why he tried to stop the counting of those ballots.
Right.
So I want to take a second here to clarify some misinformation that Trump has given people for quite some time. Trump talks about absentee ballots, right? Those are the good ballots. We trust absentee ballots. It's the mail-in ballots that are the bad ballots. They're all fraudulent. People, there is no difference between absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. They are processed the exact same way. It's that simple. And
tomatoes and tomatoes.
It is literally tomatoes and tomatoes. And the Electoral Commission...
Potatoes.
The Commissioner of the Electoral System, the coalition, has stated that every state is allowed to call them whatever they want to call them.
Sure.
People, there's multiple different names are used. Vote by mail, mail-in ballots, universal mail-in ballots, absentee ballots. These are all different names, and every state uses a different name. Now, for the record, I would like to point out that Donald Trump votes in the state of Florida because that is his permanent residence.
And a swing state, by the way.
And a swing state. Now, if you go to the Florida Department of State on their state website, if you go into their election section, you will find that Florida calls their ballots vote by mail. They are not called absentee ballots, which is Trump's precious, perfect ballots that are nothing but truth.
Terminology.
Yes. So, for the record, Trump voted by a vote-by-mail ballot, not an absentee ballot. So, and this is the terminology that Florida uses. So again, Trump has been talking about the absentee ballots, so has his press secretary, how Florida has the safest absentee ballots process, all this, but they don't even actually use that terminology in the state of Florida. They call them vote-by-mail. So again, depending on what state you are, they will call them absentee, they will call them vote-by-mail, mail-in, whatever, but they are all the same thing. Now the difference is on the states where Trump likes to say universal ballots, mail-in ballots, these are states that automatically mail out the ballots to all their registered voters. That is the only difference. The other states, the person has to request to have an absentee or a mail by vote ballot sent to them. That is the only difference, but the process for counting these ballots, no matter whether it says absentee or vote by mail, mail-in ballots, it is all the same thing. Trump has created this division to create doubt and to be able to further his narrative that mail-in ballots are fraudulent, but people, they are the same exact thing.
I've actually heard him in the context of Pennsylvania now, or his party, use both terms
right.
for different areas of the state.
Right.
what is interesting to me is that particularly mail-in ballots seem to be areas where people of color seem to reside, right?
Yes,
and so it seems very interesting to me how the terminology is really used.
Right. Look, there's been so many claims by Trump on the ballots being fraudulent. This is one of the things he's really built this year on to be able to declare this election a fraud. But the reality is all these ballots are the same. They're essentially all absentee ballots because the definition of absentee ballots means absent from the polls. That is where the term came from. So anybody who is absent from the polls, their ballot is an absentee ballot. So Trump's claim is completely false. There is no difference between absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot.
Sure.
They are equally the same and processed equally the same.
Just the process of delivery.
It's just the process of delivery, whether it's requested or it's just automatically sent.
So it's really, when you consider an absentee ballot, you're considering a two-step process. Basically, you're voting saying, I want to vote, and then you're saying, I'm sending my vote in.
Right. So one of Trump's claims is that, the states that send it, our state is one of them. Washington State is a state that automatically sends ballots out to all registered voters. I believe there's 9 states that does that. So his claim is, well, stacks and stacks of ballots just get sent out and people can collect these stacks of ballots, fill them out and send them in, and blah, blah, blah.
Which would be voting fraud.
Which is voting fraud. So people, look, if you get a ballot in the mail, and look, we got, your older daughter's ballot for a few years because she lived with us. So she didn't update her address. So for several years in a row, we would get her ballot too, and then we would give her ballot, The truth is, if we took her ballot and we decided, we're just going to fill it out and send it in, we would be committing a felony.
Right. Which we didn't,
of course. But that is on an individual person. That is not an entire party that is committing some entire massive fraud.
Right.
So if a person is dumb enough to fill out somebody else's ballot, that is on them, and they will be the ones prosecuted. And look, there's so many security measures put in place that identify these.
And I think that really what you have to look at that way is you have to look at the party itself. More specifically, you have to look at the individual pointing his finger and calling it fraud, and you have to understand that really what he's calling is a people group evil.
Yes.
He's making an assumption based on who a Democrat is, right? And certainly not the whole party is made up of people of color. That's not the case. There are people of color that are Republicans, so I don't want to say that all blacks are Democrats or anything of that nature. But what he's doing is he's clumping together what is stereotypically considered the Democrat Party, and he's basically saying the whole party is evil.
Right.
And so what he's assuming is that this evil agency is all conspiring together under the leadership of Democratic leadership, and they're all creating fraudulent ballots, one at a time, two at a time, 20,000 at a time, or in his case, he believes because he lost by 5 million almost, or right at 5 million, 5 million fraudulent votes so that he would be beaten. And that's just not the case, right? No. There is no conspiracy to see Trump lose. There is a mass increase in voting population that desires for there to be a new president. Now, a lot of people will get into, did you vote for Biden because of Biden's policies, or did you vote against for Biden because you're against Trump? I think it's tomatoes and tomatoes, right? I think that there are some phenomenal things about Biden and Harris. I'm going to add Harris to that party because that's where my excitement and enthusiasm came from.
For sure.
First African-American Asian woman in the White House. I think that is the most exciting thing that's happened in a very long time. I think it's equal to Obama, right? Your first woman real leadership, not that other positions in Congress and the Senate aren't valuable. They certainly are. But we're talking about leadership to the world. And it's time for those things to happen because the world is different than white, Anglo-Saxon, male-dominant world that was first established in America, right? That would just take, call a land that they had never seen before their property, right? And say Native Americans weren't Native Americans, they were Indians, right? Now, I use that term with no disrespect in my heart. If you love that term and you're it's kind of like the N-word for us in some senses, you may embrace it wonderfully if you're a Native American population, but that's your right to embrace, not my right, right? However, when you look at it, we are a different world that's just going to be dominated by that voice. Now, there is 55% of white women who I have seen video after video of Midwestern white males saying, I'm going to vote for Trump, and my wife is too, and the wife is never even in the picture. But that's a whole different dialogue that I'm going to skip for right now, that I think America really needs to address is where did this 55% come from?
Well, they also say there's a higher probability of getting struck by lightning than for there to actually be voter fraud.
Right.
Because there are so many security measures put in place. I mean, look, people, this is the same process that elected Trump president in 2016. And he didn't have an issue with it in 2016. He was perfectly happy to accept that win. So, again, same process.
So Tiffany, with all of this going on, right? Obviously, there's a lot of debate over mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, whatever we choose to call them, right? But can you give us a little bit of the history of when was the first, you're going to like this, when was the first time absentee or mail-in ballots were actually used?
This question makes me so excited because I really want people to know. Absentee ballots actually started, drum roll please, 1775.
The American Revolution.
The Revolutionary War. That is when absentee ballots started. Now, essentially, soldiers were out to war, right? And they wanted to be able to still vote. So a group of soldiers actually from the Continental Army, wrote a letter back to their hometowns asking, hey, can I still vote? I want to make sure my vote is still counted in the election. So the town essentially held a meeting and all agreed, well, sure, their vote should count. So they said, yes, they can send a letter in and present it as a vote for themselves.
So they used it during the Revolutionary War, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that those who are fighting for our country, their voices can actually be heard, because every vote should count.
Of course.
Every vote should count. And then it's used slightly again during the War of 1812 for very similar reasons. And then this man's hero, or maybe he's not his hero because I don't even know if Trump has heroes, but there is a massive event during the Civil War.
Yeah.
And would you tell the people?
Yeah, so Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election, and he wanted to make sure that all his soldiers could vote. So he had all of his soldiers send in letters with their vote, and surprise, surprise, Abraham Lincoln won re-election. And 76% were all military votes.
Now, there is something interesting about that I do want to point out. All soldiers could vote.
No, only male white soldiers
Imagine
could vote.
that.
So it was actually specifically written to say, because eventually the use of absentee ballots, because now we're on to the third war here with the Civil War, and it started becoming a common trend for soldiers to be allowed to vote. So they actually wrote it into a law that allows them to do that. And in that, it said very clearly that white male soldiers would be allowed to cast their vote by mail. They also used something called vote by proxy. So initially, the very first absentee ballots were them just writing down on a piece of paper who they wanted to vote for and signing their name. That is
no potential fraud there, right?
Right, and that's the crazy thing. There wasn't fraud. Like, there was never any issues with fraud. They even had something called vote by proxy, which is where they sent somebody in their stead to go vote for them.
Sure.
And that was acceptable too. Now, later on through history, when they decided to make absentee ballots actually become more normalized for people outside of military, then they started actually doing pre-printed ballots. So essentially, they did pre-printed ballots that had basically all Republicans listed, boom, boom, you're voting for all Republicans, or you're voting for all Democrats. Okay, so that they had pre-printed ones. Eventually that began to change too and became more adapted to what we see today, which is it has both Democrat, Republicans, and you select who you want.
Right.
But I find it very interesting that something that is so deep into the roots of our democracy, which is absentee, mail-in ballots, something that dates back to 1775, Trump is trying to declare fraudulent. The biggest fraud in our history is something that is so powerfully ingrained into our democracy.
Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about later this week, and I hope you'll come back and I hope you'll give us an earful of comments and likes and dislikes about this video as well. However, one of the huge things that we're going to talk about later on this week is voter suppression.
Yes.
And obviously it is a topic and a hot spot that very, very few people are really super comfortable talking about, but we want to hit it head on. And I think there's something very interesting about the coalition of people of color's vote and this concept of fraud, right? What he is doing is he's selling the American people on the idea and the concept that the fraudulent behavior is not only coming from the Democratic Party, but that it's coming through the instrument of people of color. It's a traditional racist ploy that divides and destroys and makes, I want to say weak-minded Caucasians, but it's not so much that they're weak-minded, they're just self-interested Caucasians who believe they're voting in their own best interests. Now, the interesting thing is that study after study comes out that reveals as much harm is done to the racist as is done to the person that racism is expressed towards. The same amount of economic suppression that happens to the people that are being you're being racist towards, that same degree of racial oppression is happening in a form of classism that's absolutely ripping our country apart, right? We have the world, and we always have, of haves and have-nots, right? We have this world where manipulative forces at the elite top level, right, use race to puppet a community of people, and you have to understand that I don't think you're bad just because you're a puppet. I just think that a lack of knowledge leads to our downfall. For a lot of people who have come at me, it hasn't been I'd say rational voters. It's been extreme Christians, right, who have this concept and idea of serve God, serve country. Trump is our almost spiritual leader at this time. And I agree from a biblical standpoint, and I apologize if you're on this detour with us and you don't share a Christian faith. I believe that we should submit to government. I believe that we should align ourselves to pray for our leadership. I believe that when we have lost an electoral process, that we should then turn from division and hate and not hate, but for trying to get our party to win, towards praying for our leadership, supporting our leadership. But when you have this degree of asinine behavior, you have this high level of, it's not even sophisticated racism. It is outright obvious hate towards a demographic group that is consistent with the Trump, not only Trump in the sense of him as a president, but Trump in the sense of his history, his family's history, and the world that we have lived in based on people like the Trumps that would exploit others for their own benefit to push their economic gain higher and higher until they become part of this 1% of society who does not give a flying about any one of us that are watching this video.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. I mean, the sad truth is, look, people, there's a lot right now as far as claims from Trump and lawsuits in courts, videos of showing ballots being burnt, stories about
fake news.
Stories of thousands of votes being dumped in a river, or it's just asinine, people. These videos literally have all been debunked as fake. Most of these videos have been altered. States where these videos were posted, the state officials have come out and said these ballots are not ballots at all. And they can determine that based on specific criteria on these ballots. So all this stuff that Trump is feeding you, he's retweeting videos, Trump Jr.'s retweeting videos. Like, it's
an attack against democracy.
It's an attack against democracy. He is trying to make you believe a narrative that will destroy this country.
And I think it's important that we stay involved.
Yeah.
We stay vigilant. We stay aware. And we stay loud. Okay? Voice your opinion. Voice your thoughts. And I say that too of people that support Trump. And I say that too of Republicans. Continue to make your vote be known. Continue to reach out to politicians in our area. Do not remain silent. Do not allow your vote to vanish. But stay diligent, because there will, according to the Supreme Court justice, right, there will be severe consequences to anyone that does not follow the electoral vote of their chosen people in their state.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if there's a definition of what that severe punishment is.
Right.
However, we do need to understand that we need to hold not only our president accountable, but every level of elected official in our states, in our cities, in our states, and in our nation. Right.
I mean, the truth is, I speak to all of our viewers because, the reality is that, we're getting a lot of Trump viewers who are not big fans of ours. But the truth is, knowledge is power. Okay. I just actually recently heard Obama talking in an interview where he was asked about the great division in this country. The fact that 70 million people voted for Trump, 75 million people voted for Biden, some of the closest numbers we've seen in a long time. But yet, two people with very different policies, very different ideologies, very different personalities, and our country is horribly divided right now. And so Obama was asked about, how do you fix this? Right. And something he was talking about is knowledge.
Yeah, it's good.
Truth, understanding. Citizens need to be able to have knowledge and truth. And we have allowed a president to go unchecked when he spews so much lies and hate and division, and nobody has called him out on it.
Well, you essentially look at it, and Twitter has created a debunk or defunct. I'm not a huge Twitterer.
I mean, all of his tweets are now flagged with false information because it's out of control.
And it's so necessary. Yeah. Now, the challenge is this. We live in, the very First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech.
Right.
And so how do we attack lies? How do we attack just raw, crazy, insane propaganda?
Yeah.
Right? And allow people to have freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I think it's called community. It's called relationship. It's called dialogue. Every time I jump on Facebook now, every time I get on Instagram, it is exhausting.
It truly is.
Because it's not just a dialogue, right, of opinions or ideas or thoughts or escalating into stats, escalating into truth, escalating into you're just in your feelings, escalating into fact check it, escalating into anger, escalating into defriending, right, escalating into name calling. It's absolutely insane that we as Americans can't dialogue anymore. Yeah. We're literally going back generations. We're going back to the 50s, to the 60s, to the 20s, right, where Jim Crow is kind of the standard of the world, and we're trying to get into voting suppression, which is going to be the next video that we come out with this week. And I hope you'll tune into it and give us a lot of your thoughts in regards to it, because it's a very real thing. When you have a president calling polls, right, fake news, but voting suppression, in contrast to what has historically happened, it's absolutely heartbreaking. But then again, he's the same guy that would try to sell you on the fact he's done more for the black community than any other president, maybe other than Lincoln, who actually didn't do a ton for the black community, other than sign the document to set us free from slavery. However, which is huge, right? However, he didn't do that for the purpose of our equality.
Right.
He didn't do that because he thought we were equals. He did that because he didn't see any other way to keep the Union together, which is a whole different dialogue, right? Which was the end of war. And I don't want to make I don't want to make Lincoln friends not my friends either, right? But when you look at it, you've got an individual who would call, who says he's done more for the black community than any other president, right? $250 million, he said he dedicated to HBCUs, right?
Which is actually only, I think, 80 or 90 million actually supposed to be going to them of that 250.
However, here's the real kicker to this.
Yeah.
Okay, is it's got a 10-year lease, which basically says you have no voice with me for the next 10 years. No reason for you to come to the White House.
Yeah.
Your budgets are set for the next 10 years, which you tell me after what's just happened in America with COVID, what is that dollar going to be worth tomorrow?
Yeah.
What is the American dollar going to be worth 5 years from now?
So
what is
true.
So he's collapsed the opportunity for them to come back and beg and ask for more money, because I've already graciously given you 10 years of money. That's enough. So essentially it's him doing this, which people don't want to. It gets much better, because you step it to the next level. He has now made it illegal to teach certain curriculums which are taught at traditional black colleges regarding the history of slavery in America.
And so he just recently signed that act for the education purposes, right? But in addition to that, this is where it's like a double whammy. Trump has also removed funding from any federally funded businesses that teach diversity training, diversity training.
Schools.
So it doesn't matter whether it's a government business or it is a school. If you are receiving federal funds from the government and you teach any of these things, you get nothing from it. Nothing. Now these are black colleges that teach about slavery. They teach about the true history of black people in this country. And if they teach about this stuff, they will lose all funding for their programs.
What was the one thing taught to us long ago? You've been hoodwinked.
100%. But yet, according to Trumpsters and Trump, he's done more for the black communities than any president in our history next to Lincoln. And it's just a lie, people. And the truth is, we've both have gone the rounds many times with Trump supporters, and they'll give us things that Trump has done, and then we give them facts. We give them truth and statistics, things that are verifiable, things that can be proven, and they don't even acknowledge it. Well, you're wrong. He still has done the most for black people, but it's simply not true. And this is the very frustrating part. And everything that we talk about in any of our videos, you can ask for research is very important to me. I want to make sure that we're giving you truth. We've been fed enough lies for, well, longer than Trump's been president, but for most of the founding of this country was built on lies, which will be a whole nother video. But it's time to start telling the truth.
Yeah.
It's time to start learning truth from lies and being able to recognize those again. It's time to start having what we should have, which is common sense, and understanding the difference in when you are being sold something that is just dipped in lies and deceit, to be able to recognize that. So all the information that I've given you on this video and previous videos can all be verifiable. You can find these for yourselves, and we always encourage you to go seek the truth yourself, to look it up, to verify things. But sadly, so many people use Trump as research. If he says it, well, then it must be true.
And then they do this. They jump into their feelings. Nothing more than feelings.
I mean, goodness, we watched a Trump supporter on TV literally say she's not sure if anything he says is truthful, but she still trusts him. Now, come on, people. Like, really? I mean...
And obviously, there's media manipulation. We get all that.
Oh,
there's
course.
party manipulation.
Look,
but let's get to the brass knuckles, as they would say. Figure out the truth.
Yeah.
Right. Stand with democracy.
Right.
America still has the opportunity to become great.
I mean, look, there's issues with both sides. Okay, and we are definitely not saying that Democrats are great and that's the almighty group, because there's problems on both parties, everybody. That's why we have to come together, not as political parties, but as people, as American citizens who believe in a democracy that this country was founded on, a democracy that is valuable to our way of life. We can't let somebody destroy it based on lies and deceit. We need to start recognizing truth and speaking truth and opening our minds and our hearts to receiving that truth, even though it may differ from what we have believed for a long time. Because I can tell you, my mind's been blown on more than one occasion of things that I thought were truth, and then finding out that they were lies. And it's hard to accept that sometimes, sure. But we're at a place in this country where we need to build unity, and we need to build a new America.
A humble
built
America.
On truth and wisdom.
Built on the moral values that we always believe we're building on.
Yes, for
right?
Sure.
Is integrity, character.
Yeah.
Right? Let's get back to being that nation that's the hardest working nation in the world, the best educated nation in the world, the least gullible nation in the world. I'll use some words that people are familiar with, right? It's not good to be naive, right?
No.
There's one of my favorite scriptures is to be as innocent as dove and as wise as a serpent, right? Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to recognize and realize that there are schemes and there are hustles that are done by serpent kinds of people, right? And we can't allow our eyes to be covered with scales. Mm-hmm. We have to allow them to be gently washed and humbly washed, in the sense of saying, hey, I don't have all the answers. And I certainly don't pretend to have all the answers. Right. But what I do promise is if someone brings me something logical, mm-hmm. I'm going to seek it out. I'm going to question it. I'm going to investigate it. I'm going to look at it and say, hey, is this truth or is this bullshit, right? And most of the time, if it stinks, there's a high probability that you've stepped in somebody's shit and you need to clean your shoes. Because you're walking around infecting the area that you're at with somebody else's propaganda. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Yeah. I know it's been somewhat of a long table talk for us, but I hope you got something out of it. I hope that you'll share it. I hope that you'll like it. I hope you'll dislike it if you didn't like it. But give us a reason why. Give us some in-depth thought from your heart and from your intellect as far as why you wouldn't agree. And let's get to a place where we can find some agreement that we can continue to build this nation. Because, hey, one way or another, if he steals the election or if Biden and Harris end up in the White House on the 20th, first of all, I'm going to make some money. But second of all, the important thing is that we begin from that point to begin to grow. Now, there's going to be some stumbling blocks that we're really going to stumble over, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be some things that maybe we can't decide we're not evenly yoked and this doesn't work because... But I've become friends with some white supremacists. I've become friends with some people with spider webs on their elbows and Hail Hitler on their chest in the form of numbers and the sacred declaration of white supremacy. All those things can be erased. You can scrub over. You never have to scrub over a Black Panther because the party was never based on hate. But you can scrub over a Hail Hitler or a Nazi swastika. And that doesn't change your heart, but your heart can be changed when you decide to seek out truth and to realize that just because you grew up with somebody that believed that way doesn't mean that has to be you forever. Anyway, I'm Richard Thomas.
And I'm Tiffany Thomas.
And I hope that you've enjoyed it. Please do come back. Next week's going to be the next episode. We believe is going to be on voter suppression. It's going to be valuable. Some of you are going to agree with it. Some of you are going to disagree with this. But it's going to be something that we can wrestle with and we can educate this world with. So God bless you, and we hope to see you soon.
Bye.